Welcome to today's webinar, Texas for the Democratic Win. I am Dana Freeling, a Dallas, Texas voter, calling in from my home in Finland. Texas is the third largest voting bloc from abroad and a state where we have been and can continue to be the margin of victory in down ballot races. Our voices from abroad will be ever powerful this year with voting already underway. Texas is ground zero in the GOP attack on reproductive freedom, on voting rights, on book bans, and more. With your help, we can push back on this onslaught, elect the first Democratic candidate to win a statewide race in 30 years, and flip other vital offices from red to blue. We are delighted to welcome today Congressman Colin Allred, running for Senate against Ted Cruz, Morgan Kirkpatrick, running for the State Board of Education, Katherine Culbert, running for the Railroad Commission, and Judge Christine Weems, running to be Justice for the Supreme Court of Texas. I will now hand it over to Martha McDevitt Pugh, our International Chair, for some remarks and to introduce our first guest, Congressman Colin Allred.
Thank you so much, Dana, and welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to our guests and to our Democrats Abroad members and Texas voters and all of you who've joined from around the world. I'm Martha McDevitt Pugh, the International Chair of Democrats Abroad. And as a Democratic State Party for U.S. citizens living around the world, we're at such an exciting moment. 41 days out from a critical election for president, fighting to keep the Senate and win back the House, and all of that is on our plate at Democrats Abroad. We have voters in all of those states, and I'm delighted to see our country committees around the world engaging locally and our global teams providing comprehensive and outstanding voter assistance to voters in all 50 states. And we're here to get ballots returned and counted and to ensure that U.S. citizens know they can vote, that they know how to do that, and that they know that their vote makes a difference. And Texas is one of those places where our vote can help Democrats keep the Senate. So I am honored today to introduce Colin Allred for our Texas for the Democratic Win webinar. A uniquely Texan story. The congressman was born and raised in Dallas by a single mom and a public school teacher who often worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. Allred earned a full-ride scholarship to play football at Baylor University, and after playing 5 seasons as a linebacker in the NFL, he went on to law school and to practice as a civil rights attorney. Representative Allred later served in the Obama administration, first in the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and then in the Executive Office of United States Attorneys. In 2018, Representative Allred returned to Dallas and defeated an 11-term GOP congressional incumbent to represent Texas's 32nd district. And now he's running to unseat Ted Cruz and serve as the next senator from the great state of Texas. He has pulled ahead in the polls, and with the help of our votes from abroad, we have high hopes of victory. And with that, I would like to hand over to our guest, Representative Allred.
Well, thank you, Martha, and thank you, Dana, and good to see everybody on here. I appreciate you taking your time out, because as Martha was mentioning, this is an incredibly tight race that we are going to have here in Texas, and every single vote counts, and I've always believed that before I came to Congress in my work as a voting rights lawyer, but particularly now knowing that in these close races, making sure that we get the 86,000 registered Texans who are abroad to vote is incredibly important. Martha told a bit of my story. I do really believe in our state, and I believe that if we were who Ted Cruz says we are, then my story wouldn't have been possible. Because when you grow up the way I did, you rely on a community, and a community that gave me a chance. And that's the reason why I was able to play football at Baylor and making it to the NFL and becoming a voting rights lawyer, is because I had good public schools that I went to that we invested in together. I had teachers and coaches who gave me a shot. I had a local YMCA where I went so much, they started really letting me come for free. And so that's the folks who I know helped me chase my version of the American dream. And that's who I know we are as Texans. But we have a unique problem in Texas. We all know it. And it's that Ted Cruz is an extremist. He's also someone who's only interested in himself. And his leadership, if you will, has placed us at a crossroads where freedom is fundamentally under attack in Texas. And what has made us successful as a state is all of it has been put at risk by the extremism of Ted Cruz and his ilk and his cronies. And the biggest freedom, of course, that they have taken away is a woman's right to choose in Texas. And it has had horrific outcomes and horrific consequences that were foreseeable and that were also forewarned, that we said, if you go ahead and do these things, these are what is going to happen. And we have now seen that come to pass. From our maternal mortality rate spiking to 26,000 Texas women being forced to give birth to their rapist child in the state, according to the Houston Chronicle, to the individual stories, the individual traumas that we hear about, whether it's an 8th-generation Texan like Lauren Miller, who's a friend of mine, lives a few streets over from me in Dallas, who was already a mom and got pregnant with twins, and one of the twins wasn't going to make it, and it was killing her and the other twin. Instead of getting the care she needed at the hospital I was born in Dallas, Presbyterian Hospital, she had to go to Colorado to spend $3,000 getting a procedure done by somebody that she'd never met. And this 8th-generation Texan had to come home feeling ashamed, even though she saved one of the babies by doing that. That's not who we are. And it's fundamentally a risk to everything that we care about, from our economy to our medical schools, where we're seeing fewer women applying, to our access to having enough OBGYNs in our state, to when I talk to business leaders, recruiting and retaining talent in our state is now a concern, all because of this law. And I want to make this very clear, because Ted Cruz is uniquely responsible for this law. He is the person who put the judges on the district court, appellate court, and Supreme Court levels, knowing that they were going to pursue this. He, of course, had called for and supported the Dobbs ruling, called it a massive victory. And he backed in primaries Republican state legislators, knowing that they were going to do things like this and put in place brutal laws like the one that we're under. And so he is uniquely responsible for this. And if you've heard of Kate Cox, a friend of mine in Dallas, she was already a mother of 2 and had to go to the emergency room 4 times. That she asked if she can get the care she needed close to home and was turned away and said, if you do this, we're going to prosecute your doctor and your hospital. Well, Kate had to leave the state to get the care she needed, but she's pregnant again, and she's due in January, just in time to see me have a massive victory over Ted Cruz. And that's what we're going to make sure happens on November 5th. And so we need to get all of our folks, whether they're in Texas at the moment or who are registered and able to legally vote in Texas if you're out of our voting area, to make sure that you can cast your ballot in this incredibly close election. We have pulled ahead in the most recent quality poll, but polling is just a snapshot in time. And what I've been telling folks is that all this represents is that we are in the position to win, and that now we have to spend these last 40 days making sure that we do win. And for you, and for folks who are voting from abroad, that time is almost now. I'm in my voting rights practice, I used to talk about the UOCAVA law, the overseas voter law, and I know that your ballots will be arriving and that you'll have a chance to vote in the very near future. And so it's not just for you who are on this call, who are probably the most informed people. It's to make sure that the people also get involved. And we have to do that while overcoming what we know they're doing in Texas to try and take away so many Texans' ability to vote and disenfranchise folks, and to make even our voting by mail system much harder. And so after we beat Ted Cruz, we will restore a woman's right to choose. We will protect our democracy from anything like January 6th, but also from the efforts that they do before elections to try and shape who will be able to vote in them. And we will make sure that who we are as Texans shows up and has a representative for all 30 million of us, not one who will go to Cancun when the times get tough and the going gets hard. So thank you for jumping on this Zoom. Thank you for being interested in your own capacities as leaders. I hope that you'll make sure that every registered Texan votes in this election, because you never know. It may be that vote that's the difference. And so I hope that you'll take that message, which is also a message of hope that we can do this, and that your vote could be the key. And let's get it done. So thanks so much.
Thank you so
So
much.
much for joining us today. We really appreciate you coming to speak with us. And we heard that you have to go cast an important vote yourself.
Yeah, we're here for votes this week. So yeah, but thank y'all. I appreciate you, and I'll see you on the flip side after we win.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. Well, I have the great pleasure of introducing our next candidate. And as a teacher myself, it is so important that we have someone here serving or running to serve on the State Board of Education. So I'm happy to welcome Morgan Kirkpatrick, who is running in my district for State Board of Education. Morgan is a dedicated educator with 14 years of experience teaching middle school and a passionate advocate for Texas public education. She's currently running for the Texas State Board of Education in District 15, which covers 87 counties in West Texas and the Panhandle. Morgan's deep understanding of the challenges facing students and teachers has earned her endorsements from the Texas State Teachers Association, Texas AFT, and the Texas AFL-CIO COPE. She is committed to improving public education and ensuring every Texas student has access to high-quality, equitable learning opportunities. Thank you so much for joining us today, Morgan, and I'll hand it over to you, and then we'd like to ask you some questions after you're done.
Thank you so much for having me and giving me this opportunity to speak to Democrats abroad. I love that y'all reached out because this was a group that I really hadn't even considered because you know, my district is so large. I know it's not comparable to the whole state, but you know, I was born and raised in West Texas, and I've called Lubbock home my entire life. And I started teaching right after graduating from Lubbock Christian University. I taught middle school reading and English for 14 years in Lubbock, and I thought that would be my forever career. I didn't anticipate the changes that came, especially with COVID. Our leaders had the opportunity, a once in a lifetime opportunity, to reimagine education as we know it. Instead, they chose to double down on the things that we know are not good for students with standardized testing and book bans. It's just a really scary thought to consider the whitewashing of history. And with that, I had to make the decision to step away from my classroom to protect my mental and physical health. And while I miss teaching every day, I know it was the right choice for both me and my students. One story sticks out to me. I had a student that spring of 2020. She had won the grade level I believe it was 7th and 8th grade letters about literature contest, which was with the Library of Congress, but the Texas Library Association had the state level winners planned to go to their conference in Austin that spring, right after spring break. Naturally, we never made it. And looking back, you know, that was the beginning of the end for my career as a teacher. But I have always had a passion for education and for students. And I saw that my opponent was running unopposed. And I am so frustrated with always seeing so many unchallenged positions that I felt like I have the experience that could make a difference in this situation. And I wanted him to know that I wanted not him, Aaron Kinsey, but the entire district to know that there are choices and that regular people can run for office. You don't have to be a millionaire or backed by billionaires. And it hasn't been easy, but traveling to Abilene and Amarillo, I just visited Big Spring last night and heard some amazing stories of work they're doing with high school students and registering voters. I know on the tech campus, I was able to participate in a student event for back to school, and we registered over 100 voters in 2 hours. And so I am excited with the energy that we're seeing now with Vice President Harris and Governor Walz, and then of course Representative Allred. I really think that we have a fighting chance, and to be able to speak to Democrats abroad about my passions is just a true gift. So thank you. With that, I guess I will open up for questions.
Thank you so much. It was great to hear from you, and it's such a vital role that you really are playing. I'd like to ask you the first question. The news, I hear this when I'm back home in Texas, we hear it abroad, but the news of book bannings, school budget shortages, dismantling of DEI education programs, and school vouchers seems to be a very hot topic right now. And really, with the aim of even shutting down public, you hear in Project 2025, the goal of shutting down public education. All of these things are making headlines about schools. What do you feel are the most pressing issues right now concerning education in Texas? What would you like most significantly to address?
So to begin, one of the factors that played a role in my leaving education was a state legislator passed around a list of about 850 books back in 2021 that he believed should be removed from public libraries, whether school or public. And when I left teaching, I had over 600 library books in my classroom library. And so access to books is a huge passion of mine. And I believe that if a kid is willing to pick up a book and read it when they have a smartphone computer in their hand, that is one of the most valuable ways that kids and humans can learn about each other. And so the censorship on books is something that I'm very passionate about. And I also believe it's a distraction, because I think it's one of those distraction issues that is part of the plan of Project 2025 and I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Tim Dunn and Ferris Wilkes. There was a CNN special report a couple years ago called Deep in the Pockets of Texas, and it kind of outlines their plan to dismantle public education in Texas. And so all of this plays a role in that path to pushing Christian nationalism and dismantling public education. So along with the removal of the DEI initiatives on college campuses, with Texas Tech, we've seen several really valuable groups unable to do some of the things that they've done. While I understand that a lot of that same work is still happening, for professors and people working with college students to be worried about getting in trouble for these things, it makes you wonder what is falling through the cracks. And so that's going to happen in high schools and middle schools and elementaries. And so being able to have public education without fear of retribution for teaching history, accurate, inclusive history, is to me terrifying. And so, I know that was kind of a rambling response to your question, but I feel like a lot of the things are all leading to the removal of public education.
Terrifying, really terrifying. I think Jennifer has the next question.
Oh, no, I have the next
Angela,
question.
sorry, I'm so sorry.
Morgan, I just want to thank you so much first for running, just being a normal person and deciding to run. The Texas School Board and the Board of Education has a big influence on what happens in Texas classrooms, but also the books that the school board picks has something to do with the whole United States. So what changes would you like to see?
So I learned when I decided to run, I realized how little I knew about the State Board of Education, because even as an educator, it was not on my radar. And so I had to kind of step back and take the learner's role. And one of the tools that helped me to do that was a podcast called Teaching Texas. And so it kind of goes through the history of the State Board of Education. One of the most important responsibilities includes setting curriculum standards and then also reviewing and adopting instructional materials. And so in the past, it's been kind of, Texas is one of the largest purchasers of textbooks. And so that's one reason that the publishing industry kind of changes and adapts their materials to suit the requirements set forth by the State Board of Education. And so we've seen this up close and personal in the last few months with the specifically the open, I'm sorry, when they called it the OER resources, the open educational resources, I get it mixed up because when I was teaching, OER was an open-ended response. And so I always get those two mixed up. But House Bill 1605, among many things, asked that there be a resource available to schools, and if school districts chose it, that they would receive kind of an incentive per student in order to use those materials. And so one of those is called the OER. It's the K-5 reading materials. And at the Texas House Public Education Committee hearings back in August, we heard the TEA commissioner and my opponent, Adam Kinsey, the chair of the SBOE, speak about these things. And at the board meeting last week, the SBOE meeting, they heard 8 hours of testimony because there are religious texts in these lessons from all the way from kindergarten up through 5th grade. And while the Representative Tallarico kind of shed light on the fact that they purchased it from a nationwide distributor, TEA changed it and removed some of the more widely known world religions and focused mainly on Christianity. And so there were 8 hours worth of testimony from teachers that were able to attend the meeting, from theologians, people who are in teaching as far as the Bible. And it's very evident that nobody believes that this is a good idea. And so I'm hopeful that when they vote on it in November, because there still has to be a vote, that they will reject that, because they're, beyond the separation of church and state, it's truly kind of terrifying to see the pendulum shift from the last 3 decades, and how the State Board of Education influences what students learn on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you for that. I mean, I'm a product of public schools in Texas, and, to go back and to see what's going on with my friends and their children and how much things have changed, it really is frightening. And I don't think that we've seen the worst of it. So I think one of our last questions is probably about the most egregious of topics, and what can the State Board of Education do to help prevent the school voucher program from undermining the entire public school system and like, as you said, eliminating it altogether, because that would just be tragic for the state of Texas.
For sure. And so I met Representative James Tallarico back in February in San Angelo with the Tom Green County Democrats. And I told him that we needed him to come to Lubbock to speak about vouchers and public school funding. And so from that came a panel discussion with Representative Tallarico, Senator Charles Perry, Reverend Charles Foster Johnson with Pastors for Texas Children. We had Dr. Patricia Maloney from Texas Tech, our local school board president, Beth Bridges, and then Bob Popinski with Raise Your Hand Texas. They came and had an amazing discussion trying to educate people about vouchers and public school funding. And, Senator Perry came in to a not as friendly reception as he's used to here in Lubbock, but had to face some tough questions. And so I applaud the fact that he came and shared his knowledge about the inner workings of the legislature, because unfortunately the legislature has the bulk of the authority over school funding. And so I believe that the State Board of Education members have a responsibility to be vocal and advocate for adequate funding for all schools. But more than anything else, with the responsibility of approval of accountability standards, suggesting that if this does pass, which I'm hopeful that we will have success in November and we'll be able to thwart Abbott's plan. But if not, requiring that anyone who receives voucher money has to be held to the same academic accountability standards that other schools are. Because right now, private schools aren't held to those standards. And it's not school choice for families. It's school choice for the schools. Schools get to choose which students they accept when they are privately funded. And so it's just a scary situation for low-income families, but really anybody who's not, independently wealthy and already paying private school tuition, because it's going to be more of a coupon rather than a full ride, so to speak. And so I believe that while the SBOE doesn't have direct authority over that, I believe that we have to use that responsibility to be vocal about, standing up for what's right and using that voice.
Thank you so much. One follow-up question. This comes from our audience. So we know what the State Board of Education, and maybe can't influence it as much as we would like, but what can we as voters do? What is our power to help prevent these school voucher programs from ever coming into existence?
We have to start having, I love that question, because we do have that power. And as a teacher, I know I've always been frustrated by, I guess, a lack of participation in the voting process from other teachers. And so I feel like we have to start by having these conversations with everyone in our world. In the past 2 years since I've left teaching, I have met more progressive, like-minded individuals than I ever could have imagined in Lubbock and our surrounding areas. And so while it is a red area, there are more blue dots out here than we realize. And so if we would start having these difficult conversations with the people around us, whether they agree with us or not, we can have civil conversations. And so explaining what you know and who you're voting for and why, I feel like that's number one. But also every representative or legislator, any elected official that I've ever spoken to says, well, this is what the constituents want. This is what they're contacting me and saying. And so when we're not contacting our legislators, our elected officials, and holding them accountable and saying, I don't want this, I don't want vouchers, I don't want book bans, I don't want you to ban DEI, then we're not using that voice. And so it's incumbent upon us to make sure our elected officials know what we believe, what we want from our elected officials, and then having those conversations with the people in our lives. Because, when I started a job outside of teaching, the office was told, be careful what you say. She's a Democrat. But they've come to know that I'm not a scary boogeyman. I'm a good human and a responsible employee. And so, they see that we're human, and it just, kind of humanizes the other side. And so we have to be that light for everybody else. And so having those difficult conversations to me is key.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing with us about the State Board of Education and its importance. And we wish you the best of luck in your race, and hope that we'll be seeing you on the SBOE.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I appreciate all of your hard work.
Thank you. Very nice to hear from you today. All right, I'll hand over to
I'd
Dana.
like to also thank Morgan for stepping up and running for this office and so passionately advocating for these vital issues, which are going to be raising, a new generation of Texans incredibly important. Thank you so much. And now I would like to introduce Katherine Culbert, who is running for Railroad Commissioner. And for those of you who don't know, the Railroad Commissioner does not really handle the they are overseeing the energy policy in Texas. And as you probably know, there are a lot of issues with energy in Texas, as well the environment and how that affects the environment that we all live in. So this is a extremely important position, and it is a statewide elected position. So all of you with Texas ballots, be sure to tick Democrat and listen. Let's hear what Katherine Culbert has to say. Katherine is a process safety engineer from Houston, and she has over 20 years of experience in the energy sector, which is ideal. Katherine understands well the desperate need for new leadership at the Railroad Commission, which does oversee Texas energy regulations. She understands the importance of oil and gas for the Texas economy, but believes we must hold corporations accountable and enforce safety standards and protect our environment. So thank you so much for being with us today, Katherine. We are looking forward to hearing about your candidacy.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And I apologize for some of the background noise. I'm in one of the county offices here in Austin, and they're ramping up with lots of volunteer work that's happening this afternoon. But yeah, thank you for that intro. As Dana mentioned, my name is Katherine Culbert, and I am running for the Texas Railroad Commission. And she took away my big line. The Railroad Commission has nothing to do with railroads, nothing to do with trains. They are the primary oil and gas regulator for the state. So very important. And for those overseas, I'm sure we're all familiar with OPEC, right? And OPEC was modeled after the Railroad Commission. So that kind of gives you the scale of how important this agency is and the impact it has all over the world, really. So yeah, a little background on me. I am a process safety engineer, and what that means is I spend my days being proactive. And I work in oil and gas, and I make sure that the company I work for follows all the rules, that we're following the regulations, and we're making sure that all of the oil, the gas, the chemicals that we use stay in the pipe and stay in the vessels where they're supposed to be, so that we can protect our workers, so that at the end of the day, our workers can go home in the same or better condition than what they came to work in. So that we can protect our communities where we do have operations, and so that we can ultimately protect our environment. I wanted to touch on one of the big areas that the Railroad Commission deals with is pipeline safety. And I don't know how many of you paid attention to the news, but I know that it made news up on the International Space Station last week. We had an incident in the Houston area where a car hit a pipeline valve station and caused a fire that burned for 4 days. And they could see it from the space station, and we got pictures back from there. So those are the types of things that we want to avoid, and those types of incidents affect all of us, not only here in Texas, but really around the world. And we need to be more proactive. Right now, the commissioners, and specifically the woman I'm running against, has no experience in the oil and gas industry. She's a lawyer. And she basically got her position because her father is one of the longest serving members of the Texas House. So she doesn't have many qualifications to be there, but she's the one that's chair of the Railroad Commission, and she's running our oil and gas industry right now. So that's a little about me. I will open up for questions. I'm happy to take your questions and talk about whatever area anyone wants to talk about regarding the Railroad Commission.
You're on mute, Dana.
I am on mute. Sorry, I would love to ask you a question, sneaky question. I'm actually the chair of Democrats Abroad Environment and Climate Crisis Council. So this is a position and an issue which is very close to my heart. As I'm sure most of us know, and you know, Texas is the country's largest wind energy producer, placing second in solar in the country. But of course, it's also the leader in fossil fuel extraction. As we know, the Railroad Commission has an outsized impact on energy use and environmental protections in Texas. How do you envision your role in this position in helping Texas transition to a clean energy future?
Thank you. That's a great question. So right now, the way that it's set up, the Railroad Commission has no jurisdiction over solar and wind, which is probably why they're they're doing so well and thriving so well here in Texas. But really going forward, especially in the short term, we're kind of at a we need it all, to move forward. Solar and wind, although they have made a lot of gains, they don't offer enough energy currently to supply all of us here in Texas. So we need, unfortunately, some of the fossil fuels to keep going, but we need them to be more efficient and more effective in how we're using our fossil fuels. I think that's very important, especially as we transition, to more renewables. And, we just this morning, I was at the Railroad Commission meeting, and there was discussion of how much venting and flaring is happening here in Texas. And it's crazy if you look at the volumes of methane that are being released into the atmosphere. If we were able to stop that release by capturing the methane and using it, right? So that would be that much less that we have to drill for, and really it would help us all. And it's also interesting how if you look at a lot of the oil and gas operations that are happening out, especially in the Permian Basin, out in the West Texas area, a lot of them are depending on solar and wind for their operations. So it's interesting that they are using renewable energy sources to help power their drilling operations and that sort of stuff. So we need to keep moving forward. We need to have at least in the short term, we need a little bit of everything, but we need to do it smarter and better. And honestly, the oil and gas companies have extremely smart people working there. They've built up a legacy of years and years and years of really great and smart people that are working that we can solve all these problems to really help that transition to move faster and to help protect everything with the environment that we're currently damaging.
Right.
They are, I know that there have been new regulations put in place by the Biden administration regarding the flaring and capping, but are the private companies, are these being actually heated and controlled appropriately? And I guess that's the job of the Railroad Commissioner as well.
Yeah, that should be the job of the Railroad Commissioner. That's funny that you mentioned that, because just this morning at the meeting, there was a snide comment made that the EPA is trying to shut down oil and gas in Texas, which is completely not true and completely false. But that's how the Railroad Commissioners are approaching this, and how they're approaching the new regulations that are coming out from the EPA and the Biden administration. The EPA has put out great rules around methane, which, as we all know, is one of the most potent greenhouse gases that's out there. And, it's kind of a rolling implementation. So it's not, you need to stop everything immediately. And so there's time to really work on that. And there's time to create the technology that's needed to stop these methane leaks, and to really, make it a much more friendly industry, if you will. So yeah, I think the regulations that are coming out are workable. They're not attacking oil and gas at all. They're just attacking the waste that the oil and gas industry is currently experiencing. You know, they'd rather vent and flare off the methane rather than spend the money to capture it and use it to benefit all of us.
I have a question that's back, I don't know, was it a year ago? Was it 2 years ago when there was some kind of a power outage because of the cold weather? Does the Railroad Commission take care of that too? Is that a part of the job? And I read somewhere that Texas isn't a part of the energy grid for the rest of the United States. Is that something that just has to be, or is that just, do they just prefer it that way?
They prefer it that way. Because if we were to connect with the rest of the country and interconnect the electric grid, then we would be subject to federal regulations. And Texas being, you know, the wildcatters that they are, they don't want the feds telling them what to do. So as far as the electric grid goes, they keep separate. And it was 2021, if you can believe it, when we had Winter Storm Uri, which plunged all of Texas into a deep freeze and killed, depending on which report you want to believe, anywhere from 200 to 700 people due to the cold weather. So the Railroad Commission was involved with that. They like to kind of sweep it under the rug so nobody really pays attention. But so the Railroad Commission oversees gas utilities. And so that means they regulate the gas lines that go to the power plants. And that was part of the problem during Winter Storm Uri, is the gas lines or the gas supply was not sufficient enough to supply those power plants. And so therefore they couldn't run. So therefore, you know, then things froze up because there was no power, and it just became a cascading ball from there. So the Railroad Commission absolutely was part of that and was part of the problem. And they, instead of working to try to fix that, they put out many, you know, news releases and such, and the commissioners sent out things individually saying how renewables were to blame, and you know, the windmills all froze up, and you know, there was snow on the solar panels, so therefore we couldn't get any power. But if you look at the ERCOT numbers, it was more the fault of the oil industry and oil and gas, specifically the natural gas utilities, that failed during that storm that caused all of those power outages. So we need better oversight. Just yesterday, an op-ed came out, and I haven't read the whole thing, but the gist of it kind of was, you know, talking about my opponent and saying that, you know, the Railroad Commission is supposed to be regulating this, not facilitating the industry. And that's really what they've been doing. And especially like with Winter Storm Uri, they didn't regulate. They were facilitating and trying to protect the industry, so that the industry didn't get a black eye from any activities that happened.
Wow. Well,
I remember that very well. My mom was left without power or water for a week. My 90-year-old mom was
yeah.
Iceageddon. Is it called Iceageddon? What we called Iceageddon, something like that.
Oh, I don't know. I've just heard Winter Storm Uri. I don't know if it has other catchy terms or not.
Well, on that same note, the current senator, Ted Cruz, he fled to Mexico to get and left all his constituents in a bind. It's very pathetic that he, as a sitting senator of Texas, fled the state instead of actually doing something. But that's how Republicans are. So please vote for Colin Allred. You got to get rid of that guy.
Cancun Cruise, right?
Yes,
Right.
that's right.
I have one last question for you. I don't know how you can address this, but As one of 3 commissioners, I understand there are 3 rotating commissioners. How is there any way to ensure that the thousands, and there are thousands of orphaned and polluting fossil fuel wells on farms and ranches, private ones across the state, can be sealed and properly secured according to these regulations now that have been mandated by the EPA?
Yeah, so there are over 8,000 orphan wells on the orphan well list currently, and it's crazy. The Railroad Commission just put out a report last week or 2 weeks ago that they exceeded their targets set by the legislature for plugging orphan wells. They plugged 1,048 over the last year, and their target was 1,000. But that's a little misleading, because if you look at the list of orphan wells, it never gets smaller. So every year, they pat themselves on the back that they're doing great, and they've, exceeded their targets, and they've plugged all these wells, but yet our list of orphan wells never decreases. So we really need a concerted effort, and we need a commission that's going to do more than meet the targets from the legislature. They also tout that they don't use any state money for that. They only use money that comes in from the industry. And I say, well, hey, our oil and gas companies are making billions of dollars in profit. So let's use that money and, charge them a little extra so that we can plug more of their wells and hold them responsible for cleaning up after themselves, right? We all learned in kindergarten to pick up your toys. And I feel like the oil and gas company is not picking up their toys when they're done. They're just drilling and then they move on. And, any bonds that had to be in place for the drilling go away when they sell the well. So if they sell it to a smaller company that can't afford to plug it, it then becomes essentially a ward of the state. So the Railroad Commission absolutely has control over that, and they could plug them all if they really wanted to, but they'd rather kind of go slow and keep that list growing, so that they therefore have these targets that they can exceed every year from the legislature and make themselves feel like they're doing a lot, even though in reality they're falling behind.
Well, thank you for stepping up for this important position, Katherine. It's vitally needed to preserve our planet for future generations as we do transition out, make sure that our oil and gas is safe and is as least polluting as possible as we begin to transition into a fossil fuel energy economy.
Yes, thank you so much again for having me. It's been great, and I look forward to connecting with everybody across the globe. So thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer?
All right. So we still have one candidate to hear for, Judge Christine Weems, who's running for state Supreme Court, and she'll be joining us shortly. But before she comes on, we wanted to talk a little bit about voting in Texas. And we all know how tricky it can be, that it is by design, that it is difficult. Give my slides a second to load. So I just wanted to quickly go through some of the highlights of ways to ensure that your ballot returns to Texas on time and is counted. So the first and foremost, you must fill out a federal postcard application every single calendar year that you wish to vote. This ensures federal protections. It is both registration and ballot request, and it then is good for the entire calendar year for all of the elections. And it's important, this is a distinction to the in-state absentee ballot request, the ABBM. Please make sure you're going to vote from abroad, filling out your FPCA there and emailing it back to your county. You do not need to send a hard copy of the FPCA as long as you email it. Please don't use fax, then you would have to send a hard copy. We do have a couple of boxes on the FPCA that are really critical to making sure that it is accepted. And one of these is, if you're a civilian, you must indicate your intent to return to the state. And this actually makes a huge difference in what kind of a ballot you're going to receive and how you are treated as a voter. If you say that you intend to return to the state, you will receive a full ballot. You will have all of the elections, state, local elections, all the way down. And you will then also be added to the permanent voter rolls and receive a voter registration card in the mail. However, if you say that your return is uncertain, you will be only able to vote in federal races, which are also incredibly important. This year, you will not only have president, but you'll have Colin Allred on your ballot, and you'll have a congressional race on your ballot. The other big difference, if you say that your return is uncertain, is that you are not added to the permanent voter rolls. You are only temporarily registered. And at the end of the calendar year, you are removed from the rolls, and it is as if you were never a voter in Texas. And so every year you will have to re-register. You'll have different deadlines. We get a lot of voters concerned because they have been purged. This is part of Texas law. There is no time limit to when you intend to return. You don't have to have a set date. It can be at any time in the future. There's no length of time that you have to intend to return. It's really up to you. And if you have questions, I would encourage you to reach out to us about this. And you can always update your intent and send in a new FPCA during the year. This final category is for civilians who have never lived in the United States. So children of US citizens who were born abroad. And this is a category where if you select that box, you will automatically be disqualified from voting. Please reach out to us if you fall into this category so that we can help make sure that you can exercise your right to vote. Another really important thing in Texas is the wet ink signature on your form. You need to print out your form, you need to sign it in ink and email that copy back to your local election office. They compare this to the signature that is on your signature sheet. When you vote and you return your ballot, you have to have the signature sheet. And so please keep a copy of your FPCA on hand so that you can make sure that your signature matches. This is new, that everyone now has to print their FPCAs. So please make sure that you've got that wet ink signature on your form. Ballots should have arrived by now. Federal law required that for those who had requested that they be sent out by September 21st, which was last Saturday, if you ask for it to be delivered by email. If you haven't gotten your ballots yet, reach out to us. We will help you figure out what's going on. Check your spam, your junk mail folders, looking for something that says official ballot. Either reach out to us or contact your county clerk immediately. Do it today, don't wait, and we'll figure out what's going on and we'll get you the help that you need. Once you have your ballot, we just urge you to follow the instructions carefully and refer to the guides that we have created to make it easier for you to vote. We'll be popping all of those links in the chat. It can be tricky, and we know that there are questions, and we've tried to just make the process as simple as possible and make sure that you can really be confident that your vote is going to be counted. One thing that often people ask is, what happens? Can I print my huge ballot on a smaller piece of paper? That's fine. It can be any size of paper as long as it's legible. You just fit to paper. You're going to get your ballot, you're going to get a signature sheet, and some counties, but not all, will send you templates for the outer carrier envelope. Mark your ballot, put it into just a plain white envelope, that's your privacy envelope, and then seal that up. You don't need to write anything on it. And then really important is the signature sheet. If you do not send this back, if you do not fill it out correctly, your ballot could be, well, if you don't send it back, your ballot will not be counted. And if you make a mistake on it, could also cause problems. So please be very careful as you fill this out. It is your overseas address, whichever ID you use to register, whatever you put on your FPCA, that's what you need to use here, be it your driver's license or your social security number. And then the signature here on this form is what they're going to pull out your FPCA and compare to. So please make sure that they match. That sheet just gets folded up and put with the ballot envelope into your outer carrier envelope. You can use any size of envelope, it doesn't matter. Just make sure that both of those go back to your county clerk. If you have been given a template, you can use that. You just print them out and tape them or glue them onto the outside of the envelope. The one on the back, if you have it, just sign where indicated and then glue it over the seal. If you did not receive a template, we are receiving reports, Tarrant County, Harris County, that some voters have not received a template for the back of their envelope. That's not a problem. Just be sure to seal the envelope and then sign over the seal of the envelope. They just want to ensure that you were the last person who touched your ballot before it went into the envelope. And then please get it back into the mail as soon as possible. It has to be postmarked by the day of election and arrive no later than 6 days after the election. But we know that there are delays in the United States. Get it in the mail this week. If you want to use the diplomatic pouch, check the return times first. Some places have a deadline coming up in the next day or two. And if you want to use a private courier, if you have family members voting at the same address, you can put them all together into the courier envelope, kind of like a mailbox, and share that cost. And then check that your ballot was counted. You can sign into the Texas FPCA ballot tracker and see whether or not your ballot has been received. There's an events column and it will show when your ballot was received and also accepted, this final column. It can take a week or two to get the tracker updated. If you're concerned that your ballot's not going to arrive, reach out to your county clerk directly. And if you think your ballot might not make it back on time, reach out to us. We can help you to fill out a backup ballot and make sure that you get that back quickly. If you have any questions, please reach out to voterhelp@democratsabroad.org. Join one of our Zoom rooms. If you go to votefromabroad.org, there's a whole list of Zoom rooms on the top of the page. You can write to us at tx@democratsabroad.org. We have lots of great resources on our website, including our ballot return guide. We've got candidate pages to help you do research on the candidates, including the down ballot races. And we just thank you for coming. And there's so many ways that you can get involved. Tell your friends, spread the news, volunteer with us, spread the word about voting from abroad on social media, and join our Facebook group. And we would ask that you think about making a donation of $2024 to really help turn Texas blue finally this year. If you have questions, there will be a session tomorrow night at 1 p.m. Eastern if you go to the Vote From Abroad website, you can hop on the live Zoom help there, like I said, or you can write to us directly.
I have a question very quickly. This new requirement for a wet signature was enacted just, I guess, a couple of weeks ago. Many of us registered to vote, sent in our FPCAs in January, February, so that we could vote in the primary in Texas in March. What do you suggest, that we resubmit our FPCA, or do you have any recommendations?
I mean, if you've received your ballot, your FPCA was accepted by your county clerk. So there's no reason to believe that that will cause any trouble at this point in time. I think there was a lawsuit in 2021 from vote.org where they challenged their ability to use a portal to help people register to vote. And they challenged this wet signature rule because it's actually not consequential to have a wet ink signature. And they won their case, but then that was overturned at the end of 2023. And so we think that this is the reason why now the wet ink signature has become problematic again, and why we've been asked to make sure that all of our voters are signing the form directly, printing it out and signing it and sending it back in. But as long as your form was accepted, there's no reason to believe that you would have any issues in getting your ballot accepted as well. You are registered to vote and you are ready to go. Oh, and I see that Judge Weems has joined us. Perfect timing. We were just finishing up some voting information about Texas. Thank you so much for coming today.
Certainly.
And I am going to hand over to Angela Fobbs. She's going to introduce you.
You're muted, Angela.
Okay. All right. I am so glad to introduce Judge Christine Weems. Christine Weems is the sitting judge of the 281st Civil District Court in Harris County, Texas. She is excited to be running as a Democrat for the Texas Supreme Court, place 4 in 2024. Weems earned an undergraduate degree at the University of Texas at Austin and her JD at South Texas College of Law. She is a double board certified trial attorney and in both personal injury trial law and civil trial law with a wide range of experience representing individuals and multinational corporations in litigation. Since taking the bench in 2019, she has presided over 80 jury trials in the face of courtroom shortages due to Hurricane Harvey damage of the criminal courthouse, as well as COVID-19. Welcome, Judge Weems. You have the floor.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you so much for having me.
Would you like to take a few minutes to introduce yourself and tell us about the Supreme Court race?
Absolutely. So as I said, my name is Christine Weems. I'm a district court judge here in Harris County, Houston, running for the Texas Supreme Court. I'm double board certified in civil trial law, personal injury trial law, and I'm also a member of the American Board of Trial Advocates. It's an honorary organization of trial lawyers committed to the Seventh Amendment right to a jury trial in civil cases. I talk about that because I think it is very important that we have judges who have practical trial experience, who've been in the courtroom. And I say that because the fact that we elect judges in Texas sometimes leads to perhaps people with not as much experience ending up on the judiciary. I mean, that's just the reality of it. In any given cycle in some of the larger counties, like for example, in Harris County, the year that I got elected, we had a 17-page ballot, of which there were 70 judicial races, and my race was on page 14. Now, one way to make it a little bit easier on people is we put a D or an R in front of all the candidates' names, so you at least have some idea kind of what party we're running for, so you have some inclination of what our values are. But the reason why I'm running is that there are not enough qualified members of the judiciary because we elect them, because we don't have an informed electorate. And that's just, that's no knock on the voters. It's just there are too many races. There are too many races for the voters to learn about. Even though the case is important, even a court as important as the Texas Supreme Court, which is statewide and is still on the first page of the ballot. A lot of people don't understand what the Supreme Court does. I mean, Texas Supreme Court, we have two high courts in Texas, Texas Supreme Court and the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. Texas Court of Criminal Appeals handles exactly what it sounds like, all the criminal matters. The Texas Supreme Court is a court of last resort for all civil matters. So basically everything else. Part of the reason why I'm running for the Texas Supreme Court is in part, I stay in my lane. I know I've never done any criminal work, but also there's been a lot of criticism of what our Supreme Court has done recently. And I have to be very careful about how I speak about the Texas Supreme Court, in large part because they still grade my homework. My cases that are arising out of the 281st do go up, and some of them are still pending in the Texas Supreme Court. And my judicial canons and ethics prohibit me from talking ill about other members of the judiciary. But I mean, I can say this. The Texas Supreme Court has been entirely Republican. I can talk about factual things. Texas Supreme Court has been entirely Republican since 1998. The last Democrat that was elected statewide was 30 years ago in 1994. It's been a while. And so what I am asking you, the voters, to think about are the people that you want representing you on all levels of government, not just like in U.S. House or in the state house, but even in our judiciary, because we elect our judiciary. They should reflect your values. They should think the way, not necessarily the way you do, but they should be open, honest, fair, and be willing to give both sides a shot. And that's absolutely something I'm willing to do. And we're talking about the Texas Supreme Court. You know, the kinds of cases they take up are cases that affect everyday Texans. Anytime the state legislature creates a law that someone sues to fight the constitutionality of, that can ultimately go up to the Texas Supreme Court. Election cases go up to the Texas Supreme Court. This Supreme Court actually in 2020, I think a lot of people remember during COVID, when people were not willing to leave their homes. Harris County, for example, had 11 drive-through voting locations. So for people who did not want to stand in a line super close to their neighbors, which is totally understandable in the thick of COVID, could go sit in their car, have someone bring to them the ballot, the slate, and they could vote. The Texas Supreme Court said 10 of the 11 places that were utilized for drive-through voting were invalid. These are the kinds of cases that the Texas Supreme Court does take up. In addition to the things that we most commonly think about, like cases involving abortion and women's reproductive health, that kind of thing. So it's a wide range, like literally any law, any civil law that you're going to fight the constitutionality of, that you're wondering about, like, you know, whether or not property taxes are done fairly, those kind of civil cases can ultimately be before the Supreme Court. So that's a little bit about me, and that's a little bit about my race. Well, that's a little bit about the Texas Supreme Court. If there's time, I can also talk about my race if you'd like.
Absolutely. We have a couple of questions, maybe you can weave it in too.
Absolutely.
I think you hit the nail on the head that we just honestly don't know a lot about down ballot races, and especially when there are so many. And I think it's really important that, like, the education factor of what is it that the Texas Supreme Court does that really affects the day-to-day lives of people living in Texas. So what kind of decisions have come out of the court? And you mentioned a couple, but what I think we've heard decisions related to abortion. What is going on that's affecting the day-to-day lives of Texans?
I mean, it's extraordinary to think about, but I think it is happening more and more, where high courts are considering things that I think just all thought were settled law. I mean, to put it candidly, I think everybody kind of thought abortion was settled law, and that is not the case. A case that's currently pending before the Supreme Court right now, they haven't done oral arguments on it yet, but it's literally a case regarding IVF. Yeah, I mean, we saw what happened in Alabama. And the Texas Supreme Court's about to look at something very similar. It's a divorce case where they're going to look at embryos and make a determination. This court is being asked to determine whether or not embryos are people or property. I mean, these are not easy questions, but these are questions where it is very easy to kind of blur the lines between facts, evidence, and law, and then your own personal beliefs. And I think that's kind of what we need to be more cognizant about, is that a fair judiciary has to fairly represent everybody, regardless of what their beliefs are. We're to look at every case that comes before us. That's why the judicial canons and ethics prevent me from telling you my opinion about things, anything that could potentially come before me. If you want to know how I feel about abortion, I can't tell you whether I'm pro-choice or pro-life. I can tell you that I've been endorsed by Emily's List and Beto O'Rourke, and I'm a Democrat. So read into that what you will, but abortion cases come before the court I'm in right now, in the Civil District Court. I mean, even if I wasn't running for the Texas Supreme Court, just my current bench prohibits me from talking about my position on things like abortion, about voting rights, about trans rights, about gays' rights. What I can tell you is that I will fairly consider every case before me, look at the law and look at the evidence, because that's what a judge is supposed to do. A judge is not supposed to put their thumb on the scale because of their own feelings or beliefs. It needs to be, everybody needs to have the confidence of knowing that when they come before that court, they have a fair shot. And I'd like to believe that the litigants who come before me right now in the 281st feel that way. And I hope to bring that perspective to the Texas Supreme Court. I think I see questions. So capital punishment is not something that necessarily comes before the Texas Supreme Court. That is a criminal matter. So that goes to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. So it's a totally different division. Like Texas is unique in the fact that we have two separate high courts. And that's why, like, for me, it's good for me because, like I said, I've never done a day of criminal court in my life. So I stay in my lane that's why I'm running for the Supreme Court as opposed to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals or even any of the intermediary courts of appeals. Right now, the state of Texas has 15 courts of appeal. And they take every kind of case that comes before them. They have mandatory jurisdiction, which means anybody wants to appeal criminal, civil, family, probate, any kind of case, the courts of appeals have to take them up. The Court of Criminal Appeals, which is the high criminal court, and the Texas Supreme Court, it's discretionary. Those courts decide which cases they choose to take up, and they don't have to take up everything. Oh, go ahead, Dana.
I'm sorry, I just had a kind of a question that led from that. You know, of course, the courts are vital for changing laws and changing state laws. And we see that Republicans are pretty adept at bringing certain cases to Supreme Courts, whether they be federal or state, to change the laws in those states. And I'm wondering, how can groups or individuals get cases before the courts that might improve voting rights, reproductive rights, climate justice, things that Democrats care about? I don't know if you can answer that, but I know you can't make law, but you can preside over cases that can change law.
I will say this, that one of the big issues that comes before the courts, it's not just a matter of somebody suing, because technically, we joke about it all the time, but it's truthful. Anybody can sue anybody for anything. Whether or not your suit has merit is different. But if you had $300, you can go to any court, file a piece of paper, and sue somebody for something. Now, it might get quickly tossed out. You might be on the hook for a lot of attorney's fees for filing a frivolous lawsuit, but it is doable. So I don't really know how to answer your question because, I mean, the role of the judiciary is to just take up cases that are before them. So people's motivations for filing lawsuits are not something we can really consider in when we're looking at a case. But I think a lot of how cases do get before the courts are sometimes it requires people to be proactive when they perceive that there's a wrong being done. I mean, I think that's the problem, is that a lot of, or not the problem, that's not the right way I want to say that. What I mean by is that we don't agree with all the laws that are out there, right? And one way that you can mandate change is by obviously going to our legislature, trying to convince them to change, but not always easy to try to get a body of individuals who more likely than not have passed the law in the first place to suddenly change their mind. So a lot of people go to the courts in terms of you have to have standing. I mean, you have to have had an injury in the civil world. You have to have had an injury. The law just has to affect you, right? And actually have damaged you. It's difficult. You can't just file a lawsuit because something could happen to you. Something has to have happened to you. But I think what we see too often is things do happen to people, directly affect people, and they choose not to speak up about it. And they choose not to file a lawsuit about it. And it's not that they're complacent. It's just filing lawsuits, particularly on contentious matters, can shine a lot of light and provide a lot of scrutiny that some people are not willing to fight that fight or have that limelight shined on their personal lives. That's why you see a lot of people highlighting or applauding those who are confident enough, brave enough to stand up and just to file that lawsuit and tell their story. I don't know if that really answers your question, but I hope that it gives you kind of some idea. Even in something as simple like I deal with a lot of my dockets, predominantly car wrecks. And I still think even that takes a certain amount of bravery to come in front of 12 jurors, basically sit in judgment, tell them, try to explain to them what happened to you and have them sympathize and understand that. I mean, a lot of people are particularly private, and I'm happy to talk about a lot of things that I've going on in my campaign life, but it doesn't mean I'm willing to talk to you about things going on in my personal life. And that's what you're asking people to do. You're asking people when they file a lawsuit, usually it's something more personal than business, and you're going to have to ask them to talk about it. And that takes a lot of bravery. And I think that is part of why maybe we don't see some of the laws that we disagree with changed, because when you put yourself out there, it's not just for the judgment of the 12 jurors, but it's the judgment for anybody who has an opinion, particularly now with the internet. Anybody with an opinion, you go up on social media, they'll talk about you. They'll say things about you. And some people aren't ready to deal with that or don't want to deal with it. I don't blame them.
I mean, for instance, the family of, there was a young woman who died because she didn't get abortion care from around Dallas, and she bled out. The family, are they going to go public, sue the state? Can they sue the state if those are, the draconian laws that are robbing women of their health care? So I know you can't say anything.
But I mean, that's what I mean, though. That is no doubt a very personal and emotional wound for those people, right? And if you can imagine, if they were to do something about it, having to tell that story, repeatedly tell that story to people who might be very receptive, but a whole lot of people who won't be, and are going to say things and judge. And that ends up being a bigger burden than a lot of people can bear. But I mean, I find that lawsuits, whether you win or lose, can sometimes still bring attention, right? Like if, for example, a court rules in a way that you disagree with, bringing attention to the fact that this is what this particular court is doing shines a light on perhaps we need to have a change in that court. I think that's what we're seeing right now. A little bit about we were talking about my opponent. Part of the reason why I got into this fight is I always tell people I never wanted to be a judge. This was not my cup of tea in terms of, I always wanted to be a trial lawyer. I wanted to try cases. I wanted to represent people. I wanted to be in court. It's something I'm very passionate about. That's why I teach now. I'm the director of mock trial at the University of Houston Law Center. I coach their mock trial teams. I'm also an adjunct professor there teaching trial advocacy and jury selection. I think the right to a trial by jury is incredible, fundamental, and I love teaching people how to do it. I miss doing it, but what prompted me to run in 2017 was I tried a case in front of a judge who'd never tried a case before, and it showed. And it never occurred to me that people run for judge when they've never tried cases before. Like, that made absolutely no sense to me. And so I'm the kind of person, if you see a problem in the world, you try to fix it. So I ran with the idea that, like, if I win, I'm going to be a judge and I'm going to affect at least 1/24 of the cases in Harris County, the civil cases in Harris County. But if I lose, I could always complain about the problem because at least I tried to do something about it. That is my take similarly on the Supreme Court. Again, I can't be super critical about the Supreme Court, but I can talk about facts. I can talk about things that are in the public knowledge and make sure that people are aware, like my opponent, John Devine. The reason why I'm running specifically for place 4 against John Devine, he's a 2-term incumbent shooting for his 3rd term right now. He does not believe in the separation of church and state. He has been on record saying he believes it's a myth. Most people have heard about John Devine for the first time because he had to be sued in the 90s because he had a copy of the 10 Commandments hanging in his courtroom and refused to take them down. I think most notably what he is known for is he's been arrested 37 times outside abortion clinics for protesting, and yet does not feel like he should have to recuse himself from cases involving abortion or women's reproductive health. He campaigns on the fact that he is fervently pro-life, that his wife, they have multiple children, but he campaigns on the fact that his wife had trouble with one of their pregnancies, to where they were encouraging her to have an abortion to save her life or the baby and the baby's life, and they wouldn't do it. So she lived, but the child died. And he campaigns on that fact. That's how pro-life he is, and he wants people to know it. What I think is very interesting is he is on record saying that all of his colleagues, the other 8 Republicans on the Texas Supreme Court, that they are brainwashed because they are not conservative enough. These are the facts. These are things you can find out very easily about my opponent, John Devine, that a lot of people don't know about, but I think they are very telling about him. Another fact, and why we think that this race is winnable, even though a Democrat has not won in years. And I say that because I get asked all the time, you know, Beto couldn't do it. Beto was everywhere. Everybody knew Beto. Beto went to 254 counties. You did not go to 254 counties. Not everybody knows you. Who are you, Christine Weems, to think you can win statewide? The environment is different. I've been on the ballot both times, in 2018 and 2022 when Beto O'Rourke was on the ballot. The energy is different. The enthusiasm is different. The environment is different. I don't think that the Supreme Court has been as controversial as they have been as of late. I know that our Supreme Court has ruled on something polarizing because suddenly I get a whole bunch of people reaching out to me on my website. I get a bunch of random donations from all across the country.
That's encouraging.
Reason why we think that this is a different race generally is John Devine's support. You know, I mean, he was the only one of the 3 that are up right now, the Republicans, who actually had a primary opponent. And his primary opponent came within 16,000 votes of beating him. We're talking about less than 1% statewide. Right? We talk about, a lot of people think like financial support is indication of how much support you actually have. His colleagues on the Texas Supreme Court who are running the cycle have $300,000, $400,000 in the bank. As of the last filing, John Devine has $15,000. That's unheard of when you're running a statewide campaign. And it's ironic because there was a news article in Bloomberg prior to the primary about how he showed up less than 60% of the time for work, for oral argument. And his excuse was that he was campaigning. The environment is right on so many levels. The energy is right. My opponent is ripe to be taken out of this job. And I am a very qualified person to do it. And when we talk about the energy, I mean, just since July 21st, which is when Kamala Harris got on the ballot, we have had more than 140,000 newly registered voters in the state of Texas. How incredible is that? And it's not just young people. I'm saying when I say that the energy is there, I mean, these are people who are so excited about voting that they found a computer, printed out an application, filled it out, and stuck it in the mail. Nobody mails anything anymore. And you have 140,000 people, right, who filled out a form because they wanted to vote. And so here's my concern, and the thing that I want everybody to be real mindful of, is that all this enthusiasm is great, but it has a trickle-down ballot. I'm worried that all these new voters, all the voters who are voting for the first time, are going to go there, vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, get their I voted sticker, and walk out. It never occurred to me that people did not vote all the way down until I was on the ballot for the first time in 2018. And I had friends tell me, I voted for you. And I'm like, awesome. Did you have to wait in a long line? It's like, no, I just voted for you and left. I'm like, whoa. And other people too, right? And like, no, I just voted for you. I'm like, what about everybody else? I don't know everybody else. but I knew you, so I voted for you. I'm like, that's great and all, but you know, there's an old saying that the further you get down on the ballot, the more those races actually impact your door. And so 2018, the last year that there was straight ticket voting in the state of Texas, I was, like I said, I was on page 14. I had 600,000 votes, 400,000 of them were straight ticket, and 40,000 people did not vote in my race. So even with straight ticket voting, still 40,000 people skipped over this bench and either stopped voting or voted for somebody else further on down the line. It
I think
happened.
this is a great lesson for all of us. Not everybody voting from abroad can vote all the way down ballot. It depends on your status, whether you intend to return. I certainly will. I already looked for your name, and I know that everybody who has ticked intend to return will certainly vote for every name that has a D next to it, all the way down. Thank you so much for educating us about the Supreme Court of Texas, how it works, what your story is, and your opponents as well. We have a lot of work to do, and I'm going to hand it over to Jen now, who's our Texans Abroad lead, to wrap up the program for today.
Thank you again, Judge Weems, for joining us today, and good luck in your election. Sounds like that he needs to go. So
Well, thank you
fingers
so
crossed.
much for having me and giving me an opportunity to speak, and hopefully people will just be mindful about things that, it's not just the president.
Yeah.
A lot of elections can impact our
Absolutely.
daily lives. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, and good luck with everything.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone who joined us today, and to our incredible candidates. Thank you to Representative Allred, to Morgan Kirkpatrick, to Katherine Culbert, and to Judge Christine Weems for joining us. And we wish them the best of luck in their elections, and truly hope that this is finally the year that we see a shift in Texas, that we can wake up on November 6th and it's finally come true. All that we've been working for so many years, and that we have flipped Texas blue. Please remember, if you have not requested your ballot yet, do that right away. Go to votefromabroad.org. Also, if you need help returning your ballot, if you have questions, you can write to voterhelp@democratsabroad.org, or you can go to votefromabroad.org on the website and join one of our live Zoom rooms. There is one every day this week. We will help you figure out the issues. If you have been denied a ballot, if you don't understand or not sure of the instructions, we will do whatever we can to make sure that your voice is heard this year, because every single vote will matter. And once again, thank you to the team. Thank you to Dana and Angela for getting us Representative Allred here and our other great candidates. And we just wish everyone a happy ballot week and enjoy getting those ballots back in the mail. And we look forward to a blue November 6th.
That's right, because when we vote,
We win.
We win.
very good. All right, everybody. Thanks for hanging in there with us, and we'll definitely see you. Hopefully, we'll see you in the future on it's October 13th, Dana, that we will have Jasmine Crockett with us. And that should be a great webinar.